So, my first job out of college, I got hired to work for this magazine called Metal Progress. It's METAL, not Mental Progress. And it was published by this technical society, and it involved me to move from Maryland to Ohio. So I was all excited about it. I went out and I bought all these like short sleeve white button-up shirts. And then I went to get my ties at drug fair. And I got these two ties. One was completely red, one was completely black, both 100% polyester. And there's a little tag on the back that said La Bella Collection. And it was like my first day of school. I was all excited, so I got in my low green Chevette and I drove to Ohio. And it's all kind of sweet, right? Well, when I got there, the sweetness ended. I saw the place I was going to work. The building was in the middle of the Ohio countryside, and it was covered by this massive geodesic dome, and it looked like the Death Star in Star Wars. And every workplace has a culture. You have culture of innovation, culture of appreciation, culture of customer service. Well, this place, it was a culture of you're fired. And it wasn't uncommon to just look out the window and see somebody trudging out to their car at 4:45 on a Friday afternoon with their sad little box. And the whole place, that everybody talked, the number one topic of conversation was people getting fired, past, present, and future. And the overriding question was who's next? And it was kind of like this shared cultural history, that sort of bonded everybody. And there was like this oral history passed down from generation to generation, and these famous stories that would be repeated. So, for example, I'll give you a few. There was a guy who was fired in the actual parking lot on his way to the car. There was the woman who was fired on her vacation, and when she got back, her desk was cleared off, and that's how she found out she was fired. There was a woman who the boss invited her to a Cleveland Browns game, and then the next day he fired her. And then the one that really got to me was there was this book editor who ordered the wrong thickness of paper for this book he was developing, and it ended up costing the organization $50,000 in extra postage. And as the story went, he put his head down on his desk and he cried like a baby. And everybody knew that he put his head down on his desk and cried like a baby because all the walls were glass. So everybody could look into everybody's office all day long and try to interpret what signs and what things meant. It was just a lovely atmosphere. And you could look into the boss's office too. Everybody called it the snake house. And this guy, his name was Mr. Waverly, not his real name. And he was kind of a mixture of a sociopath and an alcoholic. And he loved to fire people the way serial killers love to murder. And what was really scary about him was he was actually a very friendly guy, really nice, and the friendlier he was to you, the more likely you were to get fired. And it was almost as if he was sort of softening people up before dealing the death blow. So with all this atmosphere of sort of paranoia and fear, it wasn't surprising that people basically just lost their minds and did all sorts of bizarre things. So I want to talk about 3 particular departures that happened while I was at the organization. Okay, number 1, I had this little snow globe on my desk, really cheap little thing, and one day it just disappeared. And then I find out that everybody has little pieces of crap on their desk, like bobbleheads and things like that. They're all disappearing, and it was a mystery. Where did it go? So we had hired this guy as an abstractor who basically spent all day abstracting these technical articles, which is just, mind-numbing work. So one day, the organization had a bunch of dignitaries over for lunch, and we had this executive dining room. And there was a cart next to the executive dining room with these pieces of cake on it in little plates. And this guy went down and he took one of the pieces of cake. And somebody saw him. So he got fired. And they went up to his desk and they opened his desk, and it was full of all this stuff that he had taken off of people's desks. And the guy was a kleptomaniac. And they looked at his desk and they found this piece of paper at the bottom of a drawer. It was a list that he had made, like a to-do list. And the very last item on the to-do list was, take cake. So in other words, he planned this heist like it was Ocean's 11 or something. And it was for a piece of cake. Postscript to this guy, 2 months later, somebody reads in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, he's giving tours of historic homes. And I don't know what happened after that. Okay, that's departure number 1. Departure number 2. We hired this guy as a salesman for our magazine, named Marvin, not his real name. And he thought it would be really good for morale of the staff to hold a contest. And what he did was he took his stationery, and his stationery, I've never seen this before, on the upper left-hand corner of the stationery was his picture and his name, smiling. He gave a piece of the stationery to every staff member, and we were supposed to alter the picture in any way we wanted. And the boss, Mr. Waverly, he'd be the judge. And so people just went wild with, just really kind of mean things, like drawing a clown hat on his head, and some person whited out his face completely. I kind of got into it. I drew these 2 antennae with a little signal going off to a distant planet. And then Mr. Waverly, who's the judge, he submitted an entry. He took a picture from Penthouse and superimposed the guy's head on it. This is the boss, okay? And since he was the judge, he decided his entry had won. This is like 30 years ago. You can imagine the lawsuits today. Yeah. So Marvin didn't have the best judgment. He ended up getting fired. Departure number 3, me. Mr. Waverly started, I'd been there about 2 years, and he was starting to get kind of friendly with me, which made me really nervous. And then one day he invited me to the Trout Club. And the Trout Club was this place nearby that he used to go to lunch maybe 3 times a week. And it was one of these places where, they catch your fish in this fake pond, and you have a locker where you keep your liquor, and that kind of place. So he invited me to lunch, and I was like, oh my God, this is really bad, And I'm sitting there in my short sleeve white shirt and my red polyester tie from La Bella Collection, thinking, this is it, this is gonna be my last meal before my execution. And he starts he just tells me some dirty jokes, really stupid, and is making comments about the women in the office and talking about our colleagues in really derogatory ways, and he's a real class act. But he never got to the point where he fired me. So I got back, and of course we're like drinking our faces off and drinking rye whiskey or something, which I never had before. And so a few days after that, I'm like totally paranoid. I think, is today the day I'm gonna get fired? And because we have these glass offices, I'm constantly looking in his office, and he's talking to somebody. Oh, is he talking about me? And every time he gets up, oh, is he coming over here? And I'm thinking, well, what happens if he fires me? If he fires me, will I put my head down on my desk and cry like a baby? So a few days after that, my phone rings, and I get a job offer from this place in DC that I applied to 6 months earlier. So the federal government says like 6 months. I'd completely given up hope of hearing from them. And I took it, and I saw him in his office, and I went in and gave him my 2 weeks notice. And I was wondering how he'd react, and he's like, oh, that's great, we're really gonna miss you. And then he had a goodbye party for me at his house. And he had music and speeches, and there was a lot of cake there. And that was it. And ever since then, I've always wondered, if I hadn't have left, was I going to be next?